Hi, it's Mr. G here today, and we're going over 3.4 price ceilings and price floors. So, what really is a price ceiling and what really is a price floor? Well, we've learned so far about demand supply, and you see that in the graph right here. We have a D1, which is a demand line, S1 is our basically supply line, and you can see where they meet together, the intersection, that should be the equilibrium. Well, what happens is sometimes the government starts putting in rules or overseeing the market, and they create a situation where the market isn't allowed to get to equilibrium. And so we are calling some of these things price ceilings, price floors. So what is price ceiling? Well, just think about a ceiling in the room you're in right now. If you think about it, you can't go above it. The ceiling, if you were to be able to jump really, really high, no matter how high you can jump, you're always going to hit that ceiling. And you're not able to go to the next floor above or go above that ceiling. And that's exactly how it works with demand supply. It's like no matter how hard the market pushes, they cannot go above a price ceiling and they can't get to equilibrium. So the equilibrium is going to be above the ceiling, and the market can't get to it. So what happens then? Well, we have a situation of a shortage. The demand is going to be higher than the surplus, or sorry, than the supply, and so we're going to have a shortage situation. So in this example, we had equilibrium would have been at 1500, the quantity demanded and quantity supplied. 1500 would have been equilibrium. Well, because we have a price ceiling in place, the amount that's demanded, the quantity demanded is going to be 2,000, and the quantity supplied is only 1,000. Well, in this particular case, we have a shortage of 1,000 units. Okay, so that's what we would have, instead of having equilibrium at 1,500, we now have a shortage situation happening. And that's because we're at a price of 500 versus, say, 1,000, which we'll say is where equilibrium should have been. So without market regulations, without government regulations, essentially we would have been at an equilibrium price of 1,000 and quantity supplied and demand of 1,500. Price ceiling comes in, blocks the market from going any higher, sets the price, the maximum price that can be charged at 500. In that particular case, everyone's like, oh, I want to, say we're talking about apartment rentals, everyone's like, oh, I want to rent an apartment. So, we have 2,000 people who want to rent apartments. But now suppliers are like, you know what, that's not a lot of money. Maybe I'm not going to list my apartment at all. Maybe I'm just going to keep it for myself. So I'm not going to rent it out. Maybe, I'm not going to buy an apartment. Maybe, people aren't going to actually make more apartment buildings because they can't make enough money. There's not that incentive to overcome opportunity cost of other things that they can do with it. Well, so they supply less. And so we have basically a shortage of 1,000 units, which is what happens whenever any kind of rent control is put in place. Typically, we have situations of shortages. And so really the market has to adjust for itself in order to have no shortages. And many governments are trying to get around this, but you will always have a shortage whenever you have a rent control. And New York is a typical example. Rent controls exist in New York, but it's very hard to find a place. Lots of shortage, a lot of people trying to get places who can't. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is the opposite of a price floor. Now, if you think of a floor, we thought of a ceiling, you can't, no matter how high you jump, you can't go through it. Well, same with a floor. No matter how hard you stomp on the ground, you cannot go below the floor. You're stuck. It's basically the floor is it, and equilibrium is right below the floor, and you can't get to it. And so what do you have in this situation? You have a surplus situation. And an example of this is minimum wage. So maybe minimum wage is $10 an hour. That would have been equilibrium, and 1,500 people would have been employed. But in this particular case, the government says, no, $20 is the minimum per hour. And often governments do this. It's like, minimum wage workers need to earn more, etc. But what actually happens? Well, people who are working, basically they're like, oh, this is great. We'll get more money, so we're willing to put more of our labor out there because we earn more. People who aren't working might be like, well, for $20 an hour, I'm going to start working now. So supply goes up. But the demand, which is actually the jobs in this particular case, the demand for it goes down because people are, businesses are like $20 an hour. That's a lot of extra cost. I have to sell a lot more product. I don't make as much money, opportunity costs. I can do other things and run this business. So demands for jobs go down. And so instead of, we have 2,000 people willing to apply for jobs, only 1,000 jobs are out there. And so we have a surplus situation of basically 1,000 people that are unemployed. They're willing to work for $20 an hour, but they're not able to get jobs. And so that's what happens in this particular case. So price floor, we can't go below. Price ceiling, we can't go above. So that's what I have right here. Price ceiling can't go above this price. Price floor can't go below this price. Remember, equilibrium is out of your reach because of it. So that's one thing to look at. So price ceiling and price floors do not change supply and demand. So what does that mean? Well, they don't shift supply-demand curves. If you look at this, our supply and demand isn't shifting. All that's happening is we're preventing the market from going to equilibrium. That's it. We're just saying, no, this is the lowest price or this is the highest price we can charge given the situation, and we can't get to equilibrium. But they are not shifting the demand or supply lines. All right, so that is it for 3.4. Next section, we're going to go a little bit more into price ceilings and price floors and efficiency. All right, so see you at the next video. Bye for now.